Week 17, Overview, Hot War to Cold War. Our focus this week is on the 5 years after the end of hostilities in Europe and Asia in 1945. When the guns ceased pounding and the smoke cleared, what were conditions like in war-torn countries like Germany and Japan? How did other countries that had fought hard fare, economically and politically? What were the dominant feelings, tensions, and hopes of those who survived the war as they rebuilt their shattered nations? As with most periods of history, the general answer is conditions, emotions, and responses to the war varied widely from nation to nation. In countries where the battle had raged fiercely, like Russia, Germany, northern France, the Low Countries, Italy, Japan, the devastation to homes, places of business and industry, and society was terrible. Germany was especially hard hit. There was widespread ruin, starvation, chaos, hardly a city intact, thousands homeless, and worse, the very souls of the German people were sick. Hitler's message of hate had infected so many, and now they were either vengeful or deeply ashamed of their wartime activities. Scarcely less heartsick were those who had suffered cruelly at German hands, especially the Jews, the Russians, the French, and the citizens of the Low Countries. War trials were held in order to stay the violent emotions of hate and revenge that many felt towards both Germans and towards those of their countrymen who had worked with German occupation forces to oppress their own fellow citizens. In many cases, those who were tried were convicted, and they were imprisoned or executed for the grave crimes they had committed during the war. But thousands of ordinary citizens took the law into their own hands, becoming vigilantes and murdering those whom they felt still needed justice that the authorities were not providing. Stalin took a hard line in Europe after the war. Despite losing an estimated 25 million people during the war, Stalin was still most concerned with advancing communism worldwide. At the end of the war, many Soviets were grateful to the Western Allies for their help in World War II. The USSR had received much aid from their allies, and the people felt it deeply. But they were soon told that these feelings were wrong, and that the struggle had only just begun. The Western nations were still democracies, and therefore enemies of communism. They must be shunned, hated, despised, resisted, and destroyed in the years to come. Almost as soon as the war ended in Europe, United States leaders realized the Soviet Union threatened to become an enemy, just as it had after World War I. The difference was that after World War I, Lenin had not had the military or economic power to spread communism to the world. Stalin had that power, and more. He had already occupied much of Eastern Europe during the war as the USSR had advanced on Germany. He was now powerful enough to spread his communist regime further. As the war ended and European affairs were sorted out, countries such as Hungary, part of Austria, Western Poland, Bulgaria, and others remained in the firm grasp of Stalin's communist government. In a famous speech given in March of 1946, Winston Churchill warned the world that an iron curtain was descending on Europe. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe. Warsaw, Berlin, Prague, Vienna, Budapest, Belgrade, Bucharest, and Sofia. All these famous cities and the populations around them lie in what I must call the Soviet sphere, and all are subject, in one form or another, not only to Soviet influence, but to a very high and in some cases increasing measure of control from Moscow. Nations that bordered this Iron Curtain, such as Italy, Greece, and Turkey, were now under the constant threat of Soviet control. Stalin's USSR gradually came to be perceived no longer as an ally, but as a threat to the democratic governments of Western Europe and the other democratic nations of the world. In order to ensure containment of communism, the president announced a new foreign policy. Under the Truman Doctrine, America warned the Soviet Union that the U.S. would protect democracy around the world and halt the spread of communism, by force if necessary. Congress passed the National Security Act in 1947. Under this act, the War Department and the Department of Defense were reorganized in order to be ready for war at any time. As a result, a peacetime draft remained in effect. The Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, was created, designed to gather covert intelligence. Its creation was controversial, since at times its leaders or agents functioned without executive or legislative knowledge or approval. It was the closest thing to a secret police force the United States had ever known, which concerned many thoughtful voters. The United States took a less controversial step to contain communism in 1947. President Truman announced the Marshall Plan, which had a humanitarian as well as political goal. Secretary of State George C. Marshall believed there could be no political stability or peace if the world's economy was unhealthy. The lesson of history was that when economic conditions were desperate, totalitarian leaders thrived. Thus, the Marshall Plan served two purposes: to fight hunger and poverty, and to oppose the spread of communism. Stalin forbade the countries under his influence to accept Marshall Plan aid, especially Poland and Czechoslovakia. He recognized that ties of gratitude to democratic countries would result, which he wished to prevent at all costs. The Marshall Plan initiated the creation of a Committee for European Economic Cooperation and a Displaced Persons Plan. It also laid the foundation for the creation of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, an organization of non-communist countries that banded together economically and militarily during the Cold War. The Marshall Plan helped Western Europe get through the tough post-war years, and it aided the creation of strong new allies for the U.S. who remained democratic. All in all, it was a tremendous success. In 1948, the democratic Western nations announced that they would merge their occupied zones of Germany to create a new nation. Stalin responded by blockading the western part of Berlin, which had been divided into an eastern section ruled by the Soviets and a western section ruled by the other allies. He argued that the city could not now serve as the capital of this new West Germany since it was deep within Soviet-occupied East Germany. President Truman saw that it was imperative for West Berlin to remain free, or else all of Germany might fall to the Soviets. The Soviets blockaded the roads and railways, but they didn't control the skies. Truman ordered the Berlin Airlift, a round-the-clock delivery system of food and medicines that supplied thousands of people in West Berlin who were otherwise cut off from the free world. The Berlin Airlift lasted for over a year and succeeded in supplying the free part of Berlin with necessary supplies. On May 12, 1949, the Soviets withdrew, recognizing that their blockade had failed its purpose and unwilling to fight at that time. East and West Germany became separate nations later that month. The end of World War II was a time of transition and challenge. The hot war turned into Cold War without a minute of true peace. The leaders of the free world soon realized the Soviets were implacable foes of the democracy and capitalism that they held as essential to the protection of freedom. It was heartbreaking, but the Allies found that, in Europe, they had defeated one tyrant only to face another. Only this time there were no guns firing, at least not yet. Rather, both the communist and Western leaders sought to form strong alliances and consolidate their positions in the turbulent conditions that followed the war. Thus began a 50-year ideological struggle for the hearts and minds of nations that, though it consumed many resources of the opposing nations, was usually fought without open warfare. It came to be known as the Cold War.